The wind whispered down from the snow-capped peaks of Montana, brushing over the quiet town of Snowy Ridge like a mother's hand across a sleeping child. The mountains had already put on their heavy white coats, though winter was still weeks from its official arrival. But here, in this forgotten corner of America, the seasons followed their own rhythm, harsh, unsparing, and breathtaking. In a small cedar cabin tucked into the edge of the forest, 6-year-old Emily Rayner sat by the frosted window, tracing the condensation with a fingertip. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the pines in silence. The world, for now, was still. Inside, the crackle of firewood filled the air, the only sound in the cabin aside from the ticking of a clock that hadn't chimed in years. Her grandfather, Ben Rayner, sat in his armchair reading a worn-out copy of Call of the Wild. His beard had gone silver long ago, and his hands bore the roughness of a life lived in the wild. Across the room, Carol, his wife, stirred a pot of stew in the small kitchen. The aroma of venison and thyme offered a warmth that winter tried hard to steal. "That dog again?" Ben asked without looking up, sensing Emily's gaze fixed on the tree line. Emily nodded but didn't speak. She rarely did. Carol looked over her shoulder. "Still dreaming about your mystery pup, sweetheart?" Emily didn't answer, but her fingers paused on the glass. Last night she'd seen it again. A shadow just beyond the clearing, a large dog, black fur, amber eyes that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Ben chuckled softly. "Ain't no dog that size out there, Em. You probably saw a coyote, or maybe just your imagination stretching its legs." But Emily wasn't so sure. It wasn't the first time she'd seen it, and it never felt like a dream. Not really. Later that day, as the snow settled into ankle-deep layers, Emily bundled up in her thickest coat. Carol wrapped a red scarf around her neck, hand-knitted, fraying at the edges, and slipped a peanut butter sandwich into her pocket. "Don't go too far," Carol said. "And don't forget, wolves don't care how cute you are." Ben looked up from his book. "There haven't been wolves this side of the valley in years. She'll be fine." He winked at Emily. "Just keep your eyes open and your boots dry." With that, Emily stepped outside, boots crunching through the untouched powder. Her small figure disappeared into the tree line as the first true flurries of the afternoon began to fall. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional creak of tree branches and the distant call of a crow. Emily didn't wander far, just enough to reach her favorite pine stump near the edge of the ridge, where the woods opened up to a breathtaking view of the valley below. She sat there for a long while, unwrapping her sandwich and tearing off little pieces, tossing them into the snow. "Just in case you're hungry," she whispered, though no one was there. Or so she thought. Minutes passed. Then, from the shadows, something moved. Her breath caught. Her hand froze mid-air. There it was again, that same dog. Tall, black, muscular, a German shepherd. It stood still, half hidden by trees, its golden eyes locked on hers. But it didn't growl, didn't step forward. Emily slowly set the sandwich down on the stump, inching back, her eyes never leaving the creature. "You can have it," she whispered. "I'm not scared." And for a moment neither of them moved. Time itself seemed to pause. A child and a dog, a silent exchange in the cold wilderness. Then, like smoke on the wind, the shepherd turned and vanished between the trees, swift, silent, and gone. Emily stayed still for a long time, heart racing in her tiny chest. It wasn't just a dream. It was real. That night, the storm rolled in without warning. The wind howled through the canyons, slamming against the cabin like invisible fists. The trees groaned under the weight of new snow, and the old rafters creaked in protest. Inside, the lights flickered once, then dimmed to candle glow. Carol added another log to the fire while Ben adjusted the kerosene lamp on the mantel. "Radio said the cold front might hit early," he muttered. "Looks like they weren't bluffing." Emily sat on the rug, her sketchbook in her lap. She wasn't drawing fairies or snowmen like most kids her age. She was drawing him, the dog from the woods. The lines of his ears, the intensity of his eyes. Even at 6, her hands captured something raw and knowing. Carol noticed the picture and hesitated. "That's the same one, isn't it?" she asked gently. Emily nodded, not looking up. "He has a name," she whispered. "I think it's Shadow." Carol and Ben exchanged glances. "She's never named anything before?" Carol murmured. Ben shrugged, trying not to overthink it. "Kids get fixated. It's probably just a phase." But Shadow wasn't a phase, and tonight fate would prove it. Later, when the fire had faded to a soft red glow and the house had gone quiet, Emily stirred in her bed. Something had woken her. A sound, a feeling. She slipped from the covers, bare feet on the wooden floor, and tiptoed to the window. Outside, under a sky heavy with snow, a dark figure stood at the tree line. Shadow. He was back. Emily pressed her palm to the glass. Shadow didn't move. He simply stood there as if waiting. Then, slowly, he turned and disappeared into the woods. Emily's heart beat faster. She didn't think, she just acted. She pulled on her coat, wrapped the red scarf tight around her neck, and slipped outside. The cold hit her like a wall. The snow was deeper than before, almost up to her knees. But her little legs carried her forward, determined. She followed the faint paw prints leading away from the cabin, each one slightly melted by warmth. The trees closed in around her, and the wind screamed through the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a tree cracked under the pressure of ice. Still, she walked. She didn't call out. She didn't cry. She simply trusted. Shadow had come back for a reason, but Emily was only 6. She didn't see the patch of hidden ice until it was too late. Her boots slipped, her body pitched forward, and suddenly she was falling, down a narrow embankment, through snow and frozen brush, into a shallow ravine. The world spun, then went silent. When she opened her eyes, everything was white and blurry. Her arm hurt, her leg was twisted beneath her. She tried to move, but the pain made her cry out. No one could hear her. No one knew she was gone. Above, the snowfall thickened, muffling the forest. The cold seeped through her coat, into her bones. Her breaths came in tiny clouds, faster, shallower. She whimpered once, curled into herself like a shivering bird. And then, he was there. He moved without a sound, sliding down the slope with practiced ease. His black coat shimmered against the snow. He nudged her gently with his nose, then laid down beside her, curling his body to shield her from the wind. She buried her face in his fur, and for the first time that night, her tears stopped. "You found me," she whispered. Shadow didn't bark, didn't move. He simply stayed. Minutes turned into hours. Emily drifted in and out of sleep, her tiny fingers curled into Shadow's thick coat. The storm raged above, but inside that little hollow, surrounded by warmth and breath and instinct, a quiet miracle was unfolding. Back at the cabin, Carol jolted awake. Emily's bed was empty, her boots were gone. Panic struck fast. Ben grabbed his flashlight and rifle and rushed into the storm. The snow had already begun covering her trail, but something told him to go toward the ridge. 2 miles into the forest, his flashlight caught movement. At first, he raised his rifle. Then he saw her, his granddaughter, huddled against a massive black shepherd in the snow. Ben dropped to his knees. Shadow raised his head but didn't move, as if waiting for permission. Emily stirred and opened her eyes. "Grandpa," she said weakly. He stayed. Ben looked at the dog, at the blood on his paw, at the calm in his eyes. For the first time, the old man believed. He lowered his rifle. Shadow had saved her. That night, the storm rolled in without warning. The wind howled through the canyons, slamming against the cabin like invisible fists. The trees groaned under the weight of new snow, and the old rafters creaked in protest. Inside, the lights flickered once, then dimmed to candle glow. Carol added another log to the fire while Ben adjusted the kerosene lamp on the mantel. "Radio said the cold front might hit early," he muttered. "Looks like they weren't bluffing." Emily sat on the rug, her sketchbook in her lap. She wasn't drawing fairies or snowmen like most kids her age. She was drawing him, the dog from the woods, the lines of his ears, the intensity of his eyes. Even at 6, her hands captured something raw and knowing. Carol noticed the picture and hesitated. "That's the same one, isn't it?" she asked gently. Emily nodded, not looking up. "He has a name?" she whispered. "I think it's Shadow." Carol and Ben exchanged glances. "She's never named anything before," Carol murmured. Ben shrugged, trying not to overthink it. Kids get fixated, it's probably just a phase. But Shadow wasn't a phase, and tonight, fate would prove it. Later, when the fire had faded to a soft red glow and the house had gone quiet, Emily stirred in her bed. Something had woken her, a sound, a feeling. She slipped from the covers, bare feet on the wooden floor, and tiptoed to the window. Outside, under a sky heavy with snow, a dark figure stood at the tree line. He was back. Emily pressed her palm to the glass. Shadow didn't move. He simply stood there as if waiting. Then, slowly, he turned and disappeared into the woods. Emily's heart beat faster. She didn't think, she just acted. She pulled on her coat, wrapped the red scarf tight around her neck, and slipped outside. The cold hit her like a wall. The snow was deeper than before, almost up to her knees, but her little legs carried her forward, determined. She followed the faint paw prints leading away from the cabin, each one slightly melted by warmth. The trees closed in around her, and the wind screamed through the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a tree cracked under the pressure of ice. Still, she walked. She didn't call out. She didn't cry. She simply trusted. Shadow had come back for a reason, but Emily was only 6. She didn't see the patch of hidden ice until it was too late. Her boot slipped, her body pitched forward, and suddenly she was falling. Down a narrow embankment through snow and frozen brush into a shallow ravine. The world spun, then went silent. When she opened her eyes, everything was white and blurry. Her arm hurt, her leg was twisted beneath her. She tried to move, but the pain made her cry out. No one could hear her. No one knew she was gone. Above, the snowfall thickened, muffling the forest. The cold seeped through her coat, into her bones. Her breaths came in tiny clouds, faster, shallower. She whimpered once, curled into herself like a shivering bird. And then he was there. Shadow. He moved without a sound, sliding down the slope with practiced ease. His black coat shimmered against the snow. He nudged her gently with his nose, then laid down beside her, curling his body to shield her from the wind. She buried her face in his fur, and for the first time that night, her tears stopped. "You found me," she whispered. Shadow didn't bark, didn't move. He simply stayed. Minutes turned into hours. Emily drifted in and out of sleep, her tiny fingers curled into Shadow's thick coat. The storm raged above, but inside that little hollow, surrounded by warmth and breath and instinct, a quiet miracle was unfolding. Back at the cabin, Carol jolted awake. Emily's bed was empty, her boots were gone. Panic struck fast. Ben grabbed his flashlight and rifle and rushed into the storm. The snow had already begun covering her trail, but something told him to go toward the ridge. 2 miles into the forest, his flashlight caught movement. At first, he raised his rifle. Then he saw her, his granddaughter, huddled against a massive black shepherd in the snow. Ben dropped to his knees. Shadow raised his head, but didn't move, as if waiting for permission. Emily stirred and opened her eyes. "Grandpa," she said weakly. He stayed. Ben looked at the dog, at the blood on his paw, at the calm in his eyes. For the first time, the old man believed. He lowered his rifle. Shadow had saved her. The doctor at Snowy Ridge's small medical outpost shook his head in disbelief. "She's lucky," he murmured, unwrapping the blanket from around Emily's legs. "No frostbite, No hypothermia, just a sprain and some bruising. He glanced at Ben and Carol, both standing pale-faced nearby. If she'd been out there another hour, we'd be having a different conversation. Carol reached for her granddaughter's hand, brushing the wet strands of hair from Emily's forehead. "She's going to be okay," she whispered, as much to herself as to anyone else. But Emily wasn't listening. Her eyes, still heavy with exhaustion, flicked past her grandparents toward the doorway, searching. For him, Shadow, he wasn't there. When Ben had carried Emily out of the ravine, Shadow had stood still at the edge, watching. He didn't follow. He simply faded back into the woods, silent as ever. Emily had called for him once before, passing out again. Now, awake and safe, she couldn't stop looking toward the door. "He's coming," she said softly. "He always does." But Shadow didn't return that night. Or the next. For 2 days, Emily refused to eat more than a few bites. She answered questions with nods or single words. She didn't draw, didn't smile. Carol tried coaxing her with stories, her favorite picture books, even peppermint hot chocolate, but nothing worked. Emily just kept saying one thing: "He saved me. I need to say thank you." Ben was torn. He'd seen the dog, he believed now, but there was a stubbornness in him carved from years in the mountains and hardened by loss. "It's a wild animal, Em," he said gently. "He helped you, yes, but he's not a pet. He's not like Max used to be." He regretted the words the second they left his mouth. Emily's face dropped. Max had been their old family dog, a golden retriever who had passed away the winter her mom died. He had been her first friend, her comfort. She hadn't spoken for weeks after that. Ben sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." But it didn't matter. Emily was already turning away. That evening, as the snow settled into a hushed silence outside the cabin, Ben took his old flashlight and coat and stepped into the woods. He didn't tell Carol. Didn't want Emily to know in case it didn't work. He just started walking toward the ridge, where he'd first found them. The moon hung low over the trees, casting silver shadows across the snow. The forest felt different now, less threatening, more alive. He stopped at the edge of the ravine and knelt, setting down a tin plate of leftover stew. "Don't know if you're out there," he muttered, "but if you are, she misses you." Then he waited. It took less than 5 minutes. A rustle, a shape between the trees. Shadow stepped out, slowly, cautiously. His left front paw was wrapped in what looked like an old rag. Someone had tended to the wound. The dog's eyes locked on Ben's, calm but alert. Ben didn't move, he just spoke quietly. "She's been waiting for you." A long pause, then Ben nodded once. "Come see her, boy." And with that, Shadow began to follow. Back at the cabin, Emily sat up straight the moment she heard the soft padding on the porch. Her eyes lit up before the knock even came. "It's him!" she cried, leaping off the couch and rushing to the door. Carol barely had time to reach for her before Emily threw open the latch. There he was. Shadow stood tall, fur dusted in snow, eyes shining in the glow of the porch light. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran straight into his chest, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. Shadow stood still, then lowered his head gently onto her shoulder. Neither of them made a sound. Ben stood in the doorway, breath fogging in the cold air, watching a moment that felt almost too big for words. Carol wiped her eyes and whispered, "I guess he's not going anywhere now, huh?" Ben didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, Shadow lay curled at the foot of Emily's bed. She slept with one hand resting on his back, her breathing deep and steady. Outside, the storm began again, blanketing the world in white. But inside that cabin there was warmth. There was peace. And there was something else too. Something unspoken, stronger than any promise. A bond that would not break. Word of the dog who saved a little girl spread fast. In a town like Snowy Ridge, stories carried like the wind. By the end of the week, nearly everyone had heard about Shadow. Some thought it was just another mountain myth. Others believed every word. At the local diner, two old men argued over whether it was a rescue dog or a trained wolf. At the post office, someone tacked up a hand-drawn picture Emily had made, Shadow's piercing eyes captured in pencil. Beneath it, she'd written, "He's not lost. He found me." But the truth, as always, was more complicated. It was a Thursday morning when Deputy Rachel Morris showed up at the Rayners' cabin. Her uniform was dusted in frost, and her truck idled behind her, exhaust curling into the pale air. "Morning," she greeted as Ben stepped outside. "Mind if I ask a few questions about your new house guest?" Ben narrowed his eyes, instantly on guard. "What kind of questions?" "Just routine," she replied, though the edge in her voice said otherwise. "A man came into the station yesterday, says he thinks the dog might be a former canine unit from Missoula, one that went missing almost 2 years ago." Ben hesitated. "Shadow?" Rachel nodded. "That's not his name in the file. According to the report, his name was Ranger, trained in avalanche rescue, last seen during a mission in Glacier Park. They assumed he died during a landslide." Ben looked back toward the cabin, where Shadow lay curled by the fireplace, Emily's head resting against his chest. "Well, he's alive, and he's hers now." Rachel sighed. "Look, Ben, if it is him, there might be paperwork, ownership, liability. You know how these things go." "He saved her life," Ben said flatly. "That ought to count for something." Inside, Emily was already listening from behind the door, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the wood. "They're not taking him," she whispered to Shadow. "I won't let them." Later that day, Ben and Carol took Emily into town to talk with the sheriff directly. The room smelled like old leather and coffee. Sheriff Lanning, a barrel-chested man with a fading mustache, leaned back in his chair and eyed them carefully. "Far as I'm concerned," he said, "if the dog ain't hurting nobody, he can stay. But if somebody comes forward with proof of ownership, it gets trickier." Emily looked up from her chair. "But he doesn't belong to anyone. He came back for me." Ben placed a hand on her shoulder. "That should matter." Sheriff Lanning exhaled slowly. "It does. Believe me, it does. But laws don't always keep up with heart." On the way home, the truck was silent. Emily stared out the window, her breath fogging the glass. "What if they take him away?" she asked finally. Carol turned in her seat. "We won't let that happen, sweetie." But Shadow was no fool. That night, he paced the length of the porch, ears twitching at every sound, eyes always scanning the tree line. He hadn't been sleeping well. Not since that woman in the uniform showed up. Something in him remembered. Orders, cages, separation, maybe not in words, but in feeling. Dogs didn't forget that kind of fear. Emily woke up to find Shadow gone. She ran to the door, flung it open in her pajamas, and stepped into the cold. "Shadow?" she called into the woods. "Shadow, please don't go." Ben found her 10 minutes later, barefoot and crying in the snow. "He left," she choked out. "He thinks we don't want him anymore." Ben knelt down beside her. "That dog would walk through fire for you, Em. But sometimes even the strongest ones get scared." That evening, Ben drove into town alone. He walked into the sheriff's office with a weathered photograph in hand, an old news clipping from 2 winters ago. It showed a German shepherd coated in snow standing beside a rescue team in front of a collapsed lodge. The caption read, "Ranger, K9 Rescue, credited with saving 3 lives during the White Pass avalanche." Ben set it on the desk. "I don't care what name he used to have, he's got a new one now, and a little girl who won't sleep without him." The sheriff picked up the photo and studied it for a long time. Then he nodded once. "You've got 48 hours before someone else might come looking." 48 hours is all I need," Ben replied. That night, Shadow returned. His paws were muddy and his coat matted with burrs, but when Emily saw him on the porch, she didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around him, crying into his fur. "You came back," she whispered. Shadow licked her cheek once, then settled beside her with a sigh. She didn't know about the deadline. She didn't know about the file, the photo, or the laws. All she knew was that he was home. The storm had passed, leaving Snowy Ridge draped in silence and glittering frost. The sky was clear for once, revealing stars like spilled salt across black velvet. It should have felt peaceful, but something in the woods had shifted. Carl Dempsey noticed it first. A former trapper with too much time and not enough kindness, he'd lived off the edge of town for decades, convinced that nature owed him something. He didn't care for dogs, certainly not big wandering ones with military muscle and unknown temperaments. When word spread that the shepherd had gone rogue from a rescue unit, Carl made up his mind. "A wild dog's still a wild dog," he told his neighbor, "and wild ain't welcome near my land." He filed a complaint with the county but got nowhere, so he did what men like Carl always do when the law moves too slow. He took matters into his own hands. 2 nights later, he trekked out into the woods with an old steel trap slung over his shoulder. He planted it near the trail that ran behind the Rayner property, where he'd seen Shadow walk with Emily more than once. Just a precaution, he told himself, driving the stake deep. No one has to get hurt, not unless they step where they don't belong. Meanwhile, Emily was finally smiling again. Shadow had resumed his silent watch beside her bed, his wound healing slowly, his eyes never far from hers. Ben didn't tell her about the sheriff's warning or the trapper's complaint. She didn't need that weight on her small shoulders. But the weight came anyway. It was early morning when Emily noticed Shadow wasn't in the house. She got dressed quickly, slipping into her coat and boots, and headed for the back trail. The snow was hard-packed now, and her footprints crunched lightly as she walked. "Shadow?" she called, scanning the woods. "Come back! Breakfast's ready!" A bark cut through the air, sharp, high, pained. It wasn't far. Emily ran. She found him near the bend in the trail, half hidden behind a curtain of frost-laced pine. His front leg was caught in the steel jaws of the trap, blood already pooling beneath the snow. His body trembled with restrained panic, but he didn't thrash. His golden eyes found hers instantly, pleading but calm. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. Then she did what no one expected a child to do. She dropped to her knees, hands shaking, and began working the trap. Her fingers turned red, then raw, trying to pry the ancient metal open. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'll get you out, I promise." But it wouldn't budge. Tears stung her eyes as she pressed down harder, sobbing now. "Please." Shadow licked her hand once, then whimpered. That was when Carol, returning from town, spotted Emily's bright scarf in the woods. She stopped the truck in the middle of the road and ran, Ben close behind. When they reached the scene, Carol nearly screamed. Ben rushed to the trap, his strong hands forcing it open. Shadow yelped but stayed still. The moment the jaws released, Emily collapsed forward, wrapping herself around the dog's neck. Ben examined the injury. Puncture wounds, deep bruising, but nothing broken. Still, his blood was boiling. He recognized the make of the trap instantly. Carl's. Back at the cabin, they tended to Shadow's leg with warm water, antiseptic, and quiet fury. Emily didn't leave his side. She refused to eat, refused to rest, until Ben promised her one thing: "We'll make sure no one ever hurts him again." But trouble was already brewing. The sheriff arrived by dusk, having heard about the incident. "We've got a real problem now," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Carl Dempsey's claiming that dog's dangerous. He says it tried to attack one of his goats." Ben scoffed. That mutt wouldn't attack a goat unless it was trying to save it from Carl. Sheriff Lanning wasn't amused. "There's more. Animal control's been called in, county level. They want to evaluate the situation." Carol's face drained of color. "Evaluate?" "It means," the sheriff said quietly, "they're coming to take the dog." Emily's eyes filled with panic. But he didn't do anything wrong. He was hurt. He's the one who needs help." Ben stepped between them. "You listen to me," he said, voice tight. "That dog is a hero. He's not going anywhere." But outside, the woods had gone quiet again. Shadow lay by the fire, his breathing steady but his eyes alert, listening to the voices, sensing the storm coming not from the sky but from the hearts of men. By morning, the Rayners' cabin was no longer just a home. It had become a battleground. The pickup trucks came first, county vehicles with official plates, tires crunching over snow. 2 animal control officers stepped out, jackets marked with the state seal, eyes already scanning for movement. Sheriff Lanning was with them, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. "I told them to come quietly," he said to Ben, "but this ain't my call anymore." Emily stood barefoot on the porch, her arms wrapped around Shadow's neck. He sat beside her like a statue, wounded paw tucked beneath him, his golden eyes calm but unblinking. "You can't take him," she said, voice trembling. "He didn't hurt anybody." One of the officers, a woman named Kelly, crouched slightly, trying to soften the moment. "Sweetheart, we just want to make sure he's safe, for you and everyone else. He'll only be gone a couple of days." "You don't understand," Emily said. "He is safe." "I'm only safe because of him." Ben stepped forward. "We've got vet records. I've got proof he saved her life twice. There's no bite history, no complaints except from a man who set an illegal trap." The second officer, a tall man with sunken eyes, didn't flinch. "We're not here to judge, just to contain the situation." Ben clenched his jaw. "He's not a situation. He's family." Carol picked up her phone and started recording. She didn't say anything, just held it steady, capturing the girl, the dog, the uniforms. "People deserve to see this," she murmured. That video changed everything. By afternoon, the footage had gone viral, thousands of views. Comments poured in, some from nearby counties, others from cities far beyond Montana. Hashtags took over the story. "Let Shadow stay," "Hero dog," "Don't take the dog." Local news stations called the sheriff's office non-stop. The phones at the county building rang off the hook. One post read, "Imagine surviving a blizzard, saving a little girl's life and getting locked in a cage for it. This is America." The sheriff called Ben that night. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said. "People are demanding we drop the hold order." "So drop it," Ben replied. "I would," the sheriff sighed, "but the state's watching now. There's talk about transferring the dog to a shelter in Billings for observation." "That's 4 hours away," Ben snapped. "You take him there, he'll think we abandon him." Emily overheard, her hands curled into fists. "If they take him, I'll go too," she said quietly. "I'll sleep outside wherever he is." Ben didn't try to stop her. The next morning, Carol brought Emily to the edge of town where the county vehicles were staged. A crowd had gathered. Neighbors, parents, students, even the local pastor. They weren't shouting, they weren't angry. They just stood, holding signs, some homemade, some simple. "Let him stay. Justice for Shadow. This dog saved a life." When the animal control officers arrived, they were met with silence and then a wall of people. Sheriff Lanning stepped forward, brow furrowed. "Folks, we're just here to ensure the law's followed." But a woman near the front held up her phone. "Which law says heroes get punished?" In the middle of it all stood Emily. Shadow lay beside her, bandaged legs stretched out, head resting on her boots. She faced the sheriff directly. "Please," she said. "You told me once that the law can't always keep up with the heart, so maybe today, let the heart lead." There was a long, impossible silence. Then the sheriff pulled off his hat, glanced at the officers, and said, "We'll hold off for now." A quiet cheer rippled through the crowd, but Emily didn't celebrate. She just bent down, placed both hands on Shadow's face, and whispered, "We're not done yet." That night, Ben sat at the table with a stack of papers in front of him. "We need something stronger than signatures and hashtags," he muttered. "We need proof of ownership, legal custody. If we can't prove he belongs to us, they'll always have an excuse to take him." Carol looked over his shoulder. "What about adoption?" Ben shook his head. "Too slow, too risky." Emily walked in holding something in her hands. A dog tag. Old, scratched, but readable. It read, "Ranger K9 Rescue Unit, Missoula." Carol gasped. "Where did you get that?" "I found it in the snow, near the trap." Ben's eyes narrowed. "Well, I'll be damned. It wasn't just a tag. It was evidence. And it might be the only thing that could save him." The air was different that morning. Still, brittle, expectant. Snowy Ridge was quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Inside the Rayner cabin, tension hummed beneath every sound. The whine of the kettle, the tap of Carol's spoon against a mug, the soft creak of Emily's chair as she sat beside Shadow, tracing circles through his fur. He'd been restless all night, pacing from room to room, ears twitching, eyes sharp. Not like before. This was different, purposeful. Ben noticed it too. "He knows something," he said, pulling on his coat. "Storm's coming," Carol replied. "Or maybe it's already here." Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes drifting sideways in gusts of wind. Shadow stood at the door, nose pressed to the seam, tail rigid. Then, without warning, he barked. Once, loud, urgent. Emily sprang to her feet. "What is it, boy?" And Shadow turned to her, then back to the door, then barked again. Twice. He paced to the window, scratched the frame, then returned to the door and sat, staring at Ben. "He wants something," Emily whispered. "He wants us to follow." Ben hesitated. "You sure about this?" Shadow barked once more. That was enough. 10 minutes later, Ben had the truck idling in the driveway, emergency gear in the back, flashlight and flares packed. Shadow jumped into the bed with ease despite the limp. Emily climbed into the passenger seat, buckling herself without being told. Carol stood on the porch, eyes full of worry. "Where are you going?" she asked. Ben glanced at his granddaughter, then at the dog in the rearview mirror. "Wherever he leads us." They followed Shadow's direction up the old forestry road, now half buried in snow, slick and treacherous. The truck climbed slowly, tires spinning at times, the windshield wipers fighting to keep the glass clear. Ben gripped the wheel tighter. "We're gonna run out of road soon," he muttered. Then Shadow barked again, loud and sudden. He leapt from the truck as soon as it stopped, disappearing into the trees. Ben swore under his breath. "Stay in the truck," he told Emily, but she was already climbing out. "I have to go with him." Ben gave in. "Fine, stay close." They followed Shadow's trail through snow drifts and ice-covered brush, the wind howling like a warning through the pines. Shadow didn't slow. He led them deeper into the woods, over a frozen stream, past the wreckage of a fallen tree, until they heard it. A voice. Faint. Weak. "Help." Ben froze. Emily's eyes widened. "Dad?" She ran before Ben could stop her, scrambling over the rise. There, half buried in snow at the bottom of a slope, was a man. Face pale, lips blue, one arm twisted beneath him. His snow gear was torn, backpack flung yards away. Shadow stood beside him, barking into the wind. Emily dropped to her knees. "Daddy!" Ben slid down after her, heart hammering. He checked the man's pulse. Thready, but there. "He's alive!" Ben gasped. "He's alive!" Emily leaned in, whispering, "He brought me to you." Ben pulled out his radio. "This is Benjamin Rayner. We've got a man down, likely exposure and a broken arm. North Ridge, near the old fire line. Send evac." Shadow lay down next to the injured man, pressing his warm body close, guarding him from the wind. By the time the rescue team arrived, word had already begun to spread. Not just that a hiker had been found, but who had found him. Local news outlets picked it up first, then regional, then national. "Dog who saved little girl now saves her father," the headlines read. One German shepherd's second miracle. Shadow didn't seem to notice the cameras or the flashes. He only stayed close to Emily, always between her and the cold. Inside the hospital, her father, Luke Rayner, blinked awake hours later to find Emily asleep beside him, her hand gripping Shadow's collar like a lifeline. His voice was hoarse. "That the dog?" Ben nodded. "That's him." Luke looked down at the bandage on Shadow's leg. "He's limping." Ben smiled. "Still outran us all." Luke stared at the dog, eyes filling with something deeper than gratitude. "He found me," he whispered. Ben put a hand on his son's shoulder. "No, she found you. He just showed her the way." The sun rose slowly over Snowy Ridge, casting long golden shadows across the mountains blanketed in snow. For the first time in weeks, the sky was clear and the air didn't carry the same bitter bite. Inside the cabin, warmth radiated from the hearth as if the house itself had taken a deep breath of relief. Luke Rayner sat on the couch, arm in a sling, legs propped up, his daughter curled beside him, fast asleep with her head resting against his chest. Carol moved quietly through the kitchen while Ben stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the trees sway gently in the wind. At the front door, Shadow lay with his head on his paws, eyes half closed but ears still alert. His wound had started to heal, the limp remained, but it didn't slow him much. If anything, it gave him a quiet dignity, like a soldier bearing his scars with grace. The sheriff came by later that morning. He didn't wear his uniform, just jeans and a heavy coat. "Heard from the state," he said, taking off his hat. "They've dropped the hold order. After what happened up there, they're not touching this case." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" "Not just like that," Lanning replied. "Took some convincing. Public outcry, legal gray areas, a little help from a senator's office, and about 40,000 signatures online." He smiled. People wanted the dog to stay. The state listened. Emily clapped her hands, then ran to Shadow, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You're safe now," she whispered. "Forever." Later that week, a small crowd gathered outside the town hall for an impromptu ceremony. No speeches, no big production, just neighbors, friends, and strangers who had followed the story from afar. The mayor, a silver-haired woman with a warm smile, stepped onto the porch and read from a hand-typed paper. Today, the town of Snowy Ridge recognizes the extraordinary courage of one German shepherd, known to us as Shadow, formerly Ranger. In saving the life of young Emily Rayner and later her father, Shadow reminded us all what loyalty, instinct, and love can look like. She stepped down, knelt beside Shadow, and clipped a tag to his collar, a silver badge in the shape of a pine tree engraved with the town's emblem. "From this day forward," she said, "he is not just a dog, he is one of us." Applause rippled through the snow-covered square, quiet and reverent. A week later, Luke moved back into the cabin permanently, not to stay hidden away, but to start over. "City life was always too loud," he said. "I think we belong here now." He built a custom doghouse beside the porch, though Shadow rarely used it. He preferred to sleep at Emily's feet or on the rug near the fire. Life returned to something resembling normal. Emily started drawing again, only now her sketches showed more than one figure. A girl, a man, and a black dog standing between them, always watching. Carol found a publisher for Emily's story. The book came out months later with a simple title, Shadow Found Me. It became a quiet bestseller, not because it was flashy or sensational, but because it was true. People from all over sent letters. Soldiers, teachers, first responders, children who had lost their pets, families going through hard times. They all said the same thing. "Thank you. Your story gave us hope." One spring morning, Emily and Ben stood on the ridge where it had all begun, the place where Shadow had first appeared from the trees. The snow had melted, revealing soft earth and new grass. Wildflowers peeked out like secrets. "Hard to believe this is where he found you," Ben said. Emily nodded. "Or maybe it's where I found him." Ben looked down at her. "You know, in all my years, I've never seen anything like it." She smiled. "Maybe you weren't looking in the right places." They turned to go, and Shadow followed, his tail swaying behind him, steps steady, as if he'd never limped at all. That night, as the fire cracked and the stars blinked awake, Emily crawled into bed, Shadow settling into his usual spot by her side. She reached out, hand resting on his chest, feeling the soft thump of his heartbeat. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You stayed." Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. And inside, in that quiet cabin at the edge of the world, everything was finally, completely whole.